Now I'd like to call upon Joe Hayden, who's going to lead panel number 2. Joe?
Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Hayden. I'm a practicing lawyer for 46 years, and I practice in the criminal justice system on both sides. And we've just seen an excellent panel which has dealt with pre-existing neurological, psychiatric, behavioral issues which may lead people towards antisocial conduct and have them end up in prison. And now we're going to deal with the impact of the prison system on that person and how it exacerbates and makes things worse rather than better. We have 2 individuals who have been incarcerated and are brave and courageous enough to come up before us to talk about the incarceration experience, former Mayor Sharpe James and Bernard Kerik. And we have 3 very dedicated individuals who work and minister in the prison system, the people who will talk about their reaction to the impact of prison upon people. And then we have Professor Fullilove from Columbia University, who perhaps can give us the big picture and bring it home. And first and foremost, I'd call up Mayor Sharpe James.
Let me say that after 38 years in public office, I earned my way on this panel. Thank you, Governor. And the pain of incarceration starts before you get behind the bars. As I sat there, I saw a young man who came in who had employed for 20 years at $100,000. Before going to prison, he asked me for a job. I appointed him to a job that paid $135 for the next 10 years. He never sent me a card while I was in prison, 25 cents. Never spoke to me since the day I gave him the job. And he's still employed and I'm unemployed, part of incarceration. Think of your pet dog on a leash and stop me, Jim, in 4 minutes, John, because they say I have diarrhea of the mouth, so you stop me in 4 minutes. Prison is like your pet dog on a leash. If he does the right thing, you reward him with a can of Alpo. Does the wrong thing, you kick him, yank, take a stick, or do something wrong, or put him in a cage. That's what prison life is all about. Prison life is hell. Don't let nobody tell you anything different about that. It's dehumanizing individuals. And their job in prison is to make you less than a man or a woman. That's what they're there for. If anyone wrote Mayor Sharpe James, they cut that off. Anyone wrote Professor Sharpe James, they cut that off. Anyone wrote State Senator Sharpe James, they removed that from the envelope. You're just a number, and remember that. And no matter whether they call it maximum security, minimum security, or the new game they call camp, no walls, is still prison. The minute you step off that sidewalk, walk in the wrong direction, you'll find they still got rifles, shotguns, chains, and everything else. They move you around. Food, well, forget it. In the Army, we call it SOS, shit on shingles. Anyone been in the military? There, you better learn to eat undescribed beef, gravy, and potatoes in 100 different ways, because that's going to be your main meal. No more McDonald's, no more White Castle, no more Applebee or any of that kind of thing. My dog, I fed my dog better than they did when I was in prison. They try to reinforce you. If you, by the way, you're only entitled to a cot, toilet, and a shower, and 1 hour a week of recreation, and that's your life. And if you get tough, try to fight the system, put you in a hole where you lose all those things. They will take away commissary, the jail store. You can't go there because you stand up for your rights. You can't use the telephone, stand up for your rights. And all of those kind of, now they try to take away telephone, but that is called an entitlement. That's the thing they try to take away. So being in prison, folks, is nothing for anyone to want to go. We have, and I made a mistake at the table, I said women, and she said, no, stop it, Sharpe. Some women think that going to jail, those are the real men, because all you do is exercise every day, come out with a 12-pack or 6-pack, and women love thugs. Hello. Some women love thugs. It's nothing to be proud of. Overcrowded. Prison, by the way, I was glad when the keynote speaker said it's big business. They closed down prisons in Virginia, they would be bankrupt the next day. It's big business. Don't let anyone fool you about that. Overcrowded. It's warehousing of human beings. We were in St. Peter's in a building for 125, 350. Figure that out. 350 in a building, a cottage built for 125 people. That's what prison life is all about. Waiting to wash your clothes, waiting for the telephone, waiting to take a shower, waiting to use the microwave, and in between, violence is as active in prison as it is in real life. Fight over everything. Fight over the television. Fight over space. Hit someone with a weight bar. There's no difference inside. By the way, they said we're going to put you in a safe environment. Whoever came up with that in prison? You're in a worse environment. It can be very violent and can lose your life. So, folks, I'm here to tell you that it's nothing anyone wanted to experience. It is not natural for a human being to be caged in, to be denied freedom of movement, freedom of action, freedom of thought. Prison is hell, nothing to be proud of, and I'm so glad that this conference idea is to deal with many who come out, because many who are in prison don't belong there, folks. Let me tell you that right now. You're standing here, well, let me get John told me, don't go into your thing, boom, boom, boom. Many in prison do not belong there, I'll just say that. And it's a waste of talent, energy, too many families suffering, loss of income, loss of contact. And I wanted to be on another panel, but like I said, McGeough said I earned this panel by 2 years in prison. We'll fight over that later.
Sharpe, I have a question. It was said on the last panel, shame. Did you or people in prison when you were there feel a sense of shame?
Oh, well, oh yeah, they put the scarlet letter on you. I just told you, if I give someone a job for 20 years, making $100,000, and then they come and beg me for another job at $140,000 for 10 years, and they don't speak to me, then I'm wearing the scarlet letter. There's shame, humility, and everything else. That's the goal of prison. It's to dehumanize you. Mm-hmm. You're not somebody. And that's why I'm so glad Governor McGeough and Mayor Fulton them say, we fall down, we get up, because it can happen to everyone. You don't go to jail because you commit a crime. You can go to jail because someone want to put you in prison. Let me tell you that right now. Don't think because you go to church every day, eat 3 square meals, and do everything right, you're not going to go to jail, folks. We have overzealous prosecution in this society. Better worry about that. And so that is a question.
How about fear? When you were leaving, did you have any fear about returning to society? When you were leaving prison?
I haven't had a job since I've been back. I'm looking for one. That's why I want to join the reentry program. That is a problem. I have not been employed since I've been out of prison, so I guess I had the scarlet letter, and I'm looking for a job. If you need assistant, John, I'll be available for you too. I'll submit my resume to any members of it. I've been unemployed. I have no money. I have not had a job since I was incarcerated. I wear the scarlet letter. We can all say we fall down, we get up, but there are not too many in society who want to help you to get up. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharpe. Great job. Our next speaker is Bernard Kerik, the former police commissioner of the city of New York, and not by coincidence, he has written a book and has been on television the last few days entitled From Jailer to Jail, and he's now speaking to us about the subject matter of his book. Commissioner Kerik.
Thank you. Real quick, on December 10th, 2004, I declined and withdrew my name from consideration from being the Secretary of the Homeland Security Department for the United States government under President Bush. About 3 hours after I declined, and I came in that morning, that man right there, Governor McGeough, called me. I barely knew him. I didn't know him well. I had met him once or twice. He called me in my office and he said, keep your head up, stand strong. It's going to be rough, but you'll get through it. Thank you, sir. I have, for those that don't know me, I've been a cop. I was born in Newark. I was raised in Patterson. I went to Eastside High before Joe Clark cleaned it up. It was a rough place. I was a cop, a correctional officer. I was the warden at the county jail. I ran Rikers Island for 6 years. And in that time, I took it from one of the most violent jail systems in the nation to an international model for efficiency, safety, and security. I then took over the NYPD. I was the police commissioner on the morning and in the aftermath of September 11th. I was nominated by the president as the Secretary of the Homeland Security, and I withdrew my nomination because I had a nanny that I did not pay tax on. My decline led to 5 years of state and federal investigations. I pled guilty to 8 counts, many of which had to do with my nanny, and false statements and tax charges. Let me tell you this, I thought I knew the prison system, I thought I knew the criminal justice system. I surrendered to a federal prison in Cumberland, Maryland. I taught a life lessons class. I have put people in prison, many people, for long periods of time. Bad people that did bad things. Cop killers, terrorists, people that tried to kill me, people that killed men I worked with. I seized tons of cocaine from them. Tons, millions in drug proceeds. And I walked into a life lessons class in Cumberland, Maryland to teach young men. And I had a young black man tell me he was doing 10 years for conspiracy for possession of 5 grams of cocaine. You know what 5 grams is? It's 2 sugar packets, 3 sugar packets in a Dunkin' Donuts shop. I met commercial fishermen that caught too many fish, or the fish were too big. I was housed with somebody that sold a whale's tooth on eBay. Here's what I have to tell you. There is a purpose for prison. We have to take bad people out of society to make society safe. But when Sharpe James stood up here and said we're putting too many people in prison, let me tell you, we are putting thousands upon thousands of people in prison today that don't need to be there. Take that young man, first time, nonviolent, first time, low-level drug offense. We put him in for 10 years, 15 years. And you know what we do for him? We, the government, does nothing. In the federal prison where I was, we did nothing for them. But they get an education. They get an education for the guys that have been in for 30. And you know what that education is? They learn how to steal, cheat, lie, manipulate, con, gamble, and fight. They learn that a verbal altercation must end in a cutting or somebody getting beat down. Now, I know there's people in this country that believe, you know, the old Law and Order types, lock them up and throw away the key. I got news for you. Those kids, those young men that we do this to, I think people in Washington forget they're going back into society. Do we want them back into society as monsters? No, we do not. Those young men should be dealt with before they ever get to prison. And when they're dealt with and you take care of them and you educate them and you teach them discipline, you teach them respect, you teach them that parenting goes beyond conception, when you teach them that, then you have to do something really important. And this is a problem that leads to Sharpe James and others like him not being able to be employed today, who would bring enormous benefit to some community, some company somewhere. What we don't do is we don't dismiss that kid's conviction. So that young man who's uneducated, who we've done nothing for, who we've turned into a monster, we send him back home as a convicted felon. He's going to be a convicted felon to the day he dies. It's never going to leave him, and it's going to guarantee him that he never gets a job, that he can never be successful in society. And you know, there's 100 different advocacy groups probably in this room today. I'm going to tell you something. I have an enormous amount of respect for these groups. I have an enormous amount of respect for the work you do, transition. The governor and what he's been doing is just, it's phenomenal work. It's God's work. But I urge all of you, talk to your legislators on both sides of the aisle. The laws have to change. Mandatory minimums and sentencing guidelines have got to be appealed and reduced. Alternatives to incarcerations have to be made. We have to give people back their lives once they've paid their debt to society, because today you can pay that debt and think it's behind you. I promise you, it never goes away. It's never behind you, ever. You live with it until the day you die, and I don't give a damn how good you are and how behaved you are and how you may do wonderful work afterward. You are a convicted felon until the day you die. We are dumbing down society. It has to stop. Just over the last few days, as Joe mentioned, I put out my book. It's a new book. I urge people to read it. I also urge you to look at this website, accjr.org, accjr.org, American Coalition for Criminal Justice Reform. We have to get our government to focus on this issue. We have to have bipartisan support to change the criminal justice system. There are bad people out there doing bad things. They have to be dealt with. Police officers, federal agents have an enormous amount of work to do, enormous amounts of work to do. But they should be looking after the bad people, not taking good people that make mistakes and destroying their lives. Thank you.
Bernie, before you leave, you were a very accomplished man in governmental areas. What was it like for you emotionally when you went into prison and they slammed those doors?
Going to prison is like dying with your eyes open. You walk in and your whole world stops. The world you live in comes to a standstill. And it's horrifying because you get to watch it go on without you in it. Your children, your family. I had my brother-in-law die. My son is a Newark police officer. He's on the Newark SWAT team. One of his colleagues in the Newark Police Department was shot and killed. I've buried more cops than probably anyone in this country. I lost 23 people that worked for me on September 11th. But when my son's partner and best friend died, I couldn't be there for him. You die with your eyes open. And just to touch on something Sharpe said earlier, let me tell you something. Anybody that says prison is a country club, club-fed, minimum security, a camp, I don't give a damn where you go. The deprivation of freedom is profound. And as I've told some reporters who throw this out to me and they taunt some of these kids that come back, you were in a country club, here's what I recommend. Find the most luxurious hotel you can in Manhattan, like the Ritz, the Four Seasons maybe. Find a room, get a room in one of those hotels walk into the bathroom, they're extremely luxurious. They're all granite and marble and all cushy. Walk in, close the door, hang out for a year, and come out and tell me how luxurious it is. It's not a joke. It is not a joke. Freedom destroys you, and it destroys your children. It torments your kids mentally. There is a purpose for punishment in prison.
How about fear? Did you have any fear after they closed the doors, or fear when you were leaving?
No, I honestly, I didn't have any fear going in. Look, I ran Rikers for 6 years. I have a pretty good idea what it was going to be like. And it was basically what I thought. You become, as Sharpe said, and I went through the same, if you saw me, I was laughing when he said this. They took off mayor, they took off senator. Don't feel bad. They took off commissioner. They did the same thing to me. Anything to demean, demoralize, or degrade you, that's what they do. And I think that's a staffing and training problem. That's what that is. You know, there are some really good men and women in the federal government, in the correction department, in the Bureau of Prisons, and other correctional agencies around this country, and I ran Rikers for 6 years. I know they're out there. But sometimes there are people that work in those agencies, they believe that their job is to destroy you. That's what they think their job is. That's not their job. You are sent to prison as punishment. You are sent there to be punished. It's not their job to punish you. And sometimes they just get confused. But I've been there, and I'll say this one last thing. Coming home, was I afraid coming home? No. But I will tell you this. You look forward to coming home with all your might. That's all you think about for every minute, every second you're in an institution. And you come home, and by some delusion, you think that it's going to be okay. It's not. And I am far more privileged than most men that come out of prison. And I can tell you, it's horrific. You come back to a home that is the same house you left, but it's not the same. You come back to a spouse that you left that's not the same. You come back to children you left that are completely different, and they are devastated. They're demoralized. They're tormented. I don't know. I just think we have to rethink what we're doing in this country today. Thank you.
Thank you. We now will look from a slightly different perspective. 3 very dedicated people who counsel and minister to people in prison, who can give us their perspective, the impact on prison. And our first speaker will be Sister Elizabeth Gnam, who is the state-appointed chaplain for Trenton State Prison.
Good morning. I thought that I would be the bearer of what I want to say from the lips of those who are incarcerated. So what I'm going to share is directly from the prisoners housed at New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. Some come from groups, because I went back to study substance addiction and have some very varied, diverse groups. Some are from religious groups, and some of the thoughts are from individuals one-on-one. Mostly everything that has been said before keys into what they shared. Some of it, their childhood backgrounds that led to criminal behavior, and top of the list, a man who had been housed on the previously death row, who died a natural death after many years on death row, and posthumously was discovered to have a huge brain tumor, which immediately makes you think, how much was his behavior influenced by something that was organically wrong and undiscovered? The rest of what I need to share is top of the list. The men mention how being incarcerated really destroys the bond of the family. The difficulty they have in really keeping connected to their families, and because of New Jersey State Prison being maximum security, it keys into what was discussed about these long mandatory minimum sentences, where people perhaps committed a crime when they were 18 or 19 years old and are still in prison as they approach their 60s or perhaps 70s. So the family and the bonds of their family, education, some, as has been discussed, have tremendous creativity, talent, intelligence, but untapped. They're given the opportunity for a GED, but since the loss of the Pell Grants, there is no further really structured education like at the college level. And it could be too, because they think perhaps that people will not leave prison, but if they're convicted at a young age, even though it's maximum security and they receive a 30 or 40-year sentence, which is usually the minimum for our place, they may still be coming back into society. So those long mandatory sentences, coupled with a lack of education or skills and meaningful work. There's also been that deprivation because I think as human beings, we need to know that our life has some meaning. There's a reason to get up in the morning, and even the satisfaction that comes from doing a menial job well, at some points is lacking, more often than not. I think perhaps now in our place there may be 25 to 30% of men who are actually working at jobs. The rest of them, it's cell sand, meaning you clean your own cell and you're idle the rest of the day. Also, what they talk about as stressful is when they work towards parole, if they are eligible, and they serve many years, they try to take advantage of the programming in the prison and whatever other educative classes there might be, and they go for parole, and even though the record shows they have no major institutional infraction, they're told, okay, we're going outside the guidelines. We're assigning you another X amount of years. There's been some improvement in that, actually, because every 3 years now, people are supposed to see parole. But actually, practically speaking, I'll talk about one individual, 33 years in prison, a good institutional record, but still denied parole, and went outside the guidelines. This takes hope from people. Mm-hmm. And when we take hope from people, we're in a very dangerous place. Also, what happens to them, and so I'm trying to reflect everything they said, education, job training. In fact, they didn't even mention the food, Mayor, but they didn't even talk about some of those pragmatic stresses. What surprised me was the connections with family, the education, the lack of skills, and the lack of work, meaningful work, the parole hearings and their desperation in trying to show that they have changed and making it nigh impossible to demonstrate that. And then I think of one man that I spoke to, and this is what he said. And he's from the special needs unit, meaning that he has some diminished capacity. He's spent 42 years in prison, and what he said a major stress for him was, this is how he described it: I loved my mother more than anyone else in the world, but when she died, I went to her wake shackled up, and I stood there at the viewing, and I could not even shed a tear. So he described his major stress as that sense of detachment. It really startled me. And he said, I'm afraid if I am paroled now, I've lost all sensitivity. That's a kind of very subtle stress. But the other stresses are, and I think it's true, that so many people need not be incarcerated, you know. And as they get older, in fact, there's studies done that as we get older, we're less dangerous. Maybe we don't have the energy or the stamina to be so, but for whatever reason it is, I know that in New York, they had a program, and they have it in several other states, POPs, you know, Project for Older Prisoners, where they are able, in some ways, you know, to have their sentence lessened, to gain more privileges, to work for some kind of a reward system. Because as other speakers have said, when we warehouse people and we do nothing but the punitive, how are we trying to draw from them what's restorative, what's regenerative, you know, what is redemptive? So that's our task. And it is amazing to see people who are even in prison for life, in for instance, my 12-step group, or some of religious groups, that are still working for some kind of wanting to mentor other people or wanting to do something that's redemptive and even for their own quality of life. So I think we can't dismiss anyone. I mean, there are younger people and nonviolent offenders that shouldn't be in prison to begin with.
Sister, yeah.
63% of women, nonviolent offenders. So I thank you for your attention, and I'll defer to my other colleagues.
Our next speaker is Father Martin McGeough, who's a part-time chaplain at Trenton State Prison, as well as the head of the prison ministry for the Diocese of Trenton. Father?
Thank you. Like my good friend, Sister Elizabeth, I'm going to share with you the thoughts of the men who are at, you might say, two ends of the spectrum in terms of prison. The one place I work at is CRAF in Trenton. This is the Central Reception and Assignment Facility. So if you're beginning your state time, you come to CRAF before they farm you out to one of the other state institutions. The other place I work is Jones Farm, which is full minimum, and most of these men are at the end of their time, and they're going to be going home fairly soon. A couple of things that generally across the board they said to me. One, something which has been said by the others right before me. There is just this tremendous sense of disrespect and dehumanization that comes about. And one of the hardest things for them is the fact that automatically whatever they say is a lie. about anything. I had one man who happened to be friends with one of the officers in the prison on the first day there. The officer sat down, they chatted. When the conversation was finished, he said to him, "You know from now on that if you say something and one of my officers says something, you're wrong, he's right." I'm Catholic and we believe in papal infallibility, but I do not believe in CO infallibility. I don't believe anybody can be right all the time. But this is what they work with and what they have to deal with. Some of the stress that they deal with, the trauma they deal with, concerns their families, because they feel that at times their families get punished when they're coming to prison. Now, I heard, and actually just yesterday I had read an article online about the cost of phone calls, and they were looking in, I think it was in Indiana, where this company, for a 15-minute phone call, it cost $12.95, plus there was a surcharge of about $7, and there was the same phone call for you or for me would be 60 cents. I think the term we would use here is highway robbery. And this is what happens. Also, because the men asked me to mention it, I will. One of the things that is difficult in this day and age is there is a restriction about calling cell phones. They cannot call a cell phone. You have to have a landline. A lot of people are getting rid of landlines, and so some of these men are not able to call their families because they don't have a landline in the house. There has to be a way to put a cell phone on, check it out, make sure it's a family member, because even if you call the landline in the house, you don't know who they're talking to, and they're still listening to people. There has to be some technology, and I'm not into the technology, to be able to resolve this issue for the men, as well as the outrageous costs that are punishing their families. I know that custody has to make sure that contraband is not coming into the prison, but families do not need to be humiliated when all they're doing is coming in to visit their loved one who's incarcerated, and they don't need to be threatened with, unless you move quicker, we're going to cancel your visit today. And this, they tell me, happens as well. And I'm going to believe them because everybody else thinks they're a liar, and somebody has to believe them, so it might as well be me. There are some issues in terms of medical treatment and some fears about that. And I met a man recently, and again, this goes to the medical as well as to trusting in someone's word. Man broke a finger and was sent to a hospital, but they didn't set the finger. And when he came back, he said to the staff, at the medical staff, he said, "Well, they haven't set my finger." And they said, "They wouldn't send you home unless they set your finger." He said, "They didn't set my finger." "You're wrong. They kept telling him he was wrong." He said, "Take an x-ray." They took an x-ray. "You know, they didn't set your finger." "I told you that." You wouldn't believe me. As of Tuesday, his finger still was not set. But this is the problem. The last thing I would say is something which a number have said before me, but I promised one of the men that I would say this, and this is what he told me. He said, "Father, when you stand before the judge," he says, "you get two sentences. You get the one sentence for the time you're going to do behind the wall." He says, "You get the second sentence for what you're going to do and what you're going to pay for for the rest of your life. With Sister Liz, when you take hope away, you're just going to have more problems. Thank you for listening.
Father, I have a question. Do you think enough is done inside the prison to prepare people for reentry?
They would tell you no.
And I would ask our other panelists, going right down, do we feel enough is done to prepare the inmates for reentry?
Got it? Okay.
Who?
I'm going to say something that a lot of people may not like to hear. One, I personally don't think they do enough. But I'm going to be very truthful. It doesn't make any difference. It makes no difference. Because I know men today that have doctorates, they have masters, and they have bachelors. As long as that conviction clouds them, they will not be able to get a job. We can work on the inside till we're blue in the face, until the laws change and diminish your conviction and you pay your debt to society in whole and you're made a whole citizen again and you're given back all your civil and constitutional rights that was taken away from you. Until that happens, you are nothing, and you're going to remain nothing until the day you die.
Sharpe, quickly.
After they kicked me out of tutoring because I said I wouldn't let them cheat from taking the answer from the back of the book, I went into transportation. We took 4 prisoners to the Greyhound bus to go home. They got off the bus, ran into a bank stores, committed a crime, and told us to take them back. They felt they were not prepared to go back into society. The family didn't want them. They had no place to go, no job, no hope. 4 prisoners released after 20 years committed a crime on the spot so we could take them back into prison.
Our next speaker is Imam Rasoul Suluki from Trenton State Prison, who's the supervisor.
Good morning. I don't know, is my mic on? Okay. This is my 34th year with the Department of Corrections. I started out in the juvenile system and have worked in the camps and all the institutions that they named, reception, and I'm now at New Jersey State Prison. And I must tell you, I have absolutely very, very, very little hope in the system restoring a person. I don't see it in the system. The things that are talked about, reform and these things, it's way down the line, if it happens. So much politics and things like that. So let me tell you some of the accounts. You've already heard about Trenton, and you've heard from the men who were incarcerated. And I do like the analogy of the beautiful bathroom, because you can make prison a wonderful place by account, but inside, it's still prison. This is a story. A man sitting in my office, we're talking, then he starts telling me about a story about his father. He said his mother told him that his father would pick him up after school. So when he left school, he told his friends, I can't play, I can't do it, I gotta go home. And he rushes home. And he said he sat in the window looking for his father, who never showed, and he started crying. This kind of trauma, most of the time, is not talked about. But one of the things that really concerns me in my neighborhood, and particularly with my ethnic group, is the fact that 70% of the children are born out of wedlock. A woman, when I was traveling from Zimbabwe in the airport, she asked me where I worked. I said, in the prison. She started shaking her head. She said, no. She said, the children. But I had already too many years invested but I knew what she was saying was absolutely right. I equate prison and the inmates there with cancer. There's stage 1 and stage 4, and you work your way up. The longer you're there, the more severe. And so a person coming out has tremendous, tremendous disabilities. You're talking to people who had great lives before they were incarcerated. And as was mentioned, this is not the case for most. Most will come out uneducated, unskilled, and with very few social contacts, in addition to having the scarlet letter on their chest or the stigma of being a felon. So what I'm proposing to the group here, that it has to be done on 2 fronts. The one front is, yes, reentry is very important, but you have to stop it going into the prison in the first place. The work after incarceration is so great and is so expensive that so little would be spent before. Mm-hmm. When you're pulling money out of education, when you're pulling money out of services, you're creating the kind of environment that's going to lead to these children going back. I have to give credit to former Mayor Good of Pennsylvania, who started a program. I forget the name right now, but it's to deal with the children of incarcerated men and women. And he himself, I didn't know, his father was incarcerated, and he was mentored by someone who had such an impact on his life that, of course, he became mayor of Philadelphia. Just a little investment before will remedy a lot of what we have to do after. And there's very little that's going to be done inside. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've counseled, we've done all this, religious services and all of those things, all the training, all the Cage Your Age programs and all the things that they have going. But the counterbalance to all of that is prison life itself. It's just too extreme. And it so deadens a person. As I said, to equate it with cancer, that the longer they're in, the more severe the effect. So if we're going to work this, I hope that attention will be paid to doing something before they ever get to that state. And that's a lot easier. A child, even though, you know, the first group, with all the things that they showed about the brain and what's happening, just a little love at an early age. Love shown later doesn't have the same effect, but a little love early takes care of a lot of what we're talking about. So I would encourage us not to just look at the end, but work on that beginning, because that's the key. And in the black community, for us, we have to start promoting marriage and establishing families. The government can't do anything for that. We, in our churches, in our mosques, and in our community, and in our own families, we have to say, get married. What good is a reunion when you just have leaves and there's nothing attached to the tree anymore? All right. So promote marriage in our families and be supportive of those that are married now by helping them financially and in any way that we can to stay married as young people. Because without that, with 70% of the children born out of a wedlock and the families being destroyed like they are, this is one of the things at Trenton State Prison, or New Jersey State Prison, they changed the name. When people die now, some families don't claim the body because there's no one home grandma that used to be there with the little insurance policy isn't there anymore. So you see the breakdown of the family, what happens. So even when a man dies, he doesn't have a place. So let's work to pull our families together. Let's work on this beginning. And also, because it's such a problem, we do have to support this idea of reentry. But don't look for change too much with the prison system. Work in the areas that we can actually do something today. And we don't have to wait for the government to do anything. We can do these things now. Reentry, we can do something now, and working with the children, we can do something now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And finally, we have as our cleanup hitter, Associate Dean and Professor of the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University, Professor Robert Fullilove.
I hope it's okay if I inject a little glimmer of hope in what has been a really depressing set of presentations. In January of this year, I celebrated my 25th year as a professor at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. But for the last 5 years, I have been teaching as part of the Bard College Prison Initiative in 6 facilities in upstate New York. I have been teaching a curriculum that is based heavily on public health with the hope that I will produce a series of college graduates on the inside who will come back to their communities and function as public health professionals. Some of them will go to graduate school and take up Masters of Public Health and even Doctors of Public Health. And I've already got 3 who graduated from Woodbourne State Correctional Facility who are in Columbia University's School of Public Health and who are pursuing degrees in epidemiology. You have to understand that the world of public health has suddenly discovered in the United States the real costs of mass incarceration. It isn't just a tragedy that is visited on the individual. They come from communities that are already characterized by what we in public health describe as health disparities. Simply put, they come from communities where folk are frequently suffering from a host of illnesses that will kill them at an early age. Leaving communities that are ill and going into a facility and then coming back typically means that they left sick and come back sicker. I have been, for the last 30 years, been doing HIV/AIDS research and have written a lot demonstrating the degree to which mass incarceration drove the AIDS virus in the black communities in the United States. Understand, for example, that the state prison system in New York is one where 55 to 60% of all the inmates doing time came from 7 neighborhoods in New York City. Those are the neighborhoods that right now to this day have the highest background rates of HIV infection. Why did this happen? Because when we made a war on drugs in the 1970s, we made a decision to lock up that group that was most likely to be exposed to the virus that caused AIDS. In the 1990s, rates of HIV infection in the prisons were 5 to 7 times what they were in the general population. And what we have is a cycling mechanism. People leave communities with high background rates of infection, they go to places where there's a heavy concentration of infection, and then they come back. I want to suggest that so many adults in these communities constitute not simply a burden in terms of the weight that they carry for the systems of health in their communities, because rates of obesity, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes are also driven by having so many adults away. The notion that I can take a bunch of folk who are on the inside, train them to be public health professionals, have them come back to their communities and function within the confines of Obamacare. Understand that the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, is not just about medical care. It's about preventive care. If we got more folk going to see the doctors instead of the emergency rooms, we would catch a whole bunch of illness that typically only shows up at a point where it's become chronic. What if we had a system of preventive care where men who have been on the inside reach out to all the men who are on the outside but who once were on the inside and said, now is the moment when you can be assured that you will have the health insurance that will do a dramatic amount to deal with the issues of health that you may have suffered on the inside and that continue to bother you while you're on the outside. The most important part, I think, of all this is the degree to which we're really talking about a group of men who have the capacity to be college students. It is true that you can predict the rate of incarceration in the community by looking at the reading scores that that community will generate in the 4th grade. But not everybody who's on the inside is lacking in education. I have men who have done incredible work in areas of mathematics and language. When Bard College had its graduation at Eastern State Correctional Facility in upstate New York, 14 of the men who got bachelor's degrees were folk who had been studying a wide variety of topics, and 6 of them got degrees in higher mathematics, having done senior theses on number theory, combinatorics, and game theory, stuff that very, very few of my students at Columbia have ever even heard of. The level of intelligence that I see on the inside, the waste that this represents in our community is a tragedy that I cannot begin to describe. What makes it worse is that in 1994, the Congress, in its infinite wisdom, decided that it would suspend Pell Grants that would have allowed large numbers of inmates to get the college education that would have provided them with something at the point that they get on the outside. For example, we like to describe public health as a felony-friendly work situation, because we don't care where you've been. What we care about is where are you now and what can you do for us today. Having folks see this is a possibility, having them come back and be not simply ambassadors of health, but folk who are really committed to work with the youth in their communities. A lot of the guys that I talk with on the inside talk about, let me go talk to some of these knuckleheads, because I've got to let them know that there's something for them in the world of education that they need to revisit. I have every reason to believe that although we have described in great detail the tragedies that folk on the inside suffer, I think it's important for us to understand that if states begin to understand the ways in which education can benefit those on the inside, the ways in which they can benefit those on the outside, that we're going to start to hopefully see a dramatic change in many of our thoughts about the ways in which education can change the problems and the tragedies of mass incarceration. Governor Cuomo last year in March summed it up neatly. He said it costs us $60,000 a year in the state of New York to keep a person locked up. And what's the return on that investment? Within 3 to 4 years, 45 to 50% of the folk who get out will be back. He then said it costs us $5,000 for the Bard Prison Initiative to provide a college education for a man on the inside. Graduates of that program have a recidivism rate of less than 5%. Do the math. Do the math. Mass incarceration costs the community money. Mass incarceration is driving much of what I see as a public health professional as the illnesses in the community. What would happen if the folk that we saw as part of the problem suddenly became part of the solution? I want to suggest that education on the inside is one of the ways in which we can transform the tragedies that we've heard about thus far and start to think about rebuilding communities that have been suffering terribly under the weight that has been imposed on them by the poor educational facilities that are there, but which can be reborn if the folk who come back are given a chance to lead it back. Thank you.
Professor, I was particularly struck by your use of the word waste. Waste of resources, waste of money, waste of talent. And what I have seen in my 45 years in the criminal justice system is too many people are prosecuted for too many hyper-technical crimes and put in jail for too long once they get into the system. And the system becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, we gave this guy that sentence, then we should give that gal the sentence, and we should keep him in jail for that long. And by the way, let's not even relook at the parole guidelines because we don't want to do anything to overturn the system. Every one of our speakers could have spoken for an hour on this. I would have wanted to hear every one of our speakers for about an hour. I have to thank each and every one of you for your contribution and also your restraint in trying to go with our time schedules. In the world of recovery, they say you have to accept and acknowledge the problem and then move on to the solution. Well, our third panel this afternoon will deal with the solution and the very creative and innovative programs which are now going on to deal with the problem. But I thank our speakers for today. Thank you.